Ooh, okay, good. So yeah, as I was just saying, there's that scene where Aaron is trying to kill Jake, with one of the alien weapons that we've talked about in length in this class. And the scene just ends abruptly with a crash. We don't actually see the car, crash or anything. We just kind of see Aaron try to shoot Jake, and then boom, black screen with just audio, of it's just audible, all the crashing and everything. And so there's that. And so there's our next two scenes, folks, that we wanted to go over in class today. So very good scenes, very good scenes. We have a lot of things being established here, so let me just jump into that for a second. So we're showing the, social ecosystem, right, of of Rhode Island and of the local area in which Jake lives in. And in these scenes, we are introduced to the relationships, the deeper relationships that Jake has with Phil and with Kate, and Aaron's even there, right? Crazy enough. And then the brother's introduced, as I told you, very important. And so we're establishing, the whole foundation for all of these characters in these two scenes. Just in these two scenes. So it's early Act 1, and I think what we're going to do is just jump into a little more character study. So, Jake, again, is 27 years old. He's just the grocery clerk at the McQuade's market. And his archetype is very much the observer. Jake is an observer, and his surface personality is calm, thoughtful, slightly reserved. He's not socially awkward, but he's clearly more comfortable observing than dominating in conversations, right? And we see these in these two scenes. He's not, taking over. He's just kind of hanging out, as he participates in the jokes and the laughter at the bar. He responds often he responds showing a desire for order and logic, even within, his bantering. So for example, he says, I just like things that make sense, right? And that line alone defines Jake's worldview. Some of his traits, that we could focus on too is rationality, for one, as I mentioned. Jake wants the world to behave according to understandable rules, and so that's why Aaron fascinates him, in a sense, but also unsettles the hell out of him. And there's an emotional caution. Jake has a lot of emotional caution. He avoids risky emotional situations. And his approach to relationships is, if I were to take a line from our script, I just don't see the point. Yes, because for example, in the script here, and I don't know where in the scene, but you look back and you can see, he says, I just don't see the point if nothing is going anywhere. Oh yeah, that's right. Because he's talking about a relationship with Kate. Kate's trying to dig at him about relationships, and he says, I just don't see the point if it's not going anywhere. And so he certainly wants, he wants the certainty. Certainly wants the certainty before the investment. And so another thing is that's kind of plays into his slight detachment, right? So even when drunk, he maintains a strong, strange observational distance to everyone that he interacts with. He laughs at Aaron's philosophical questions rather than engaging with them too seriously. Kind of writes them off, And the narrative function of Jake's behavior here. Jake represents the human desire for logical structure. Okay? Make sure you put that in your notes. Jake represents the human desire for logical structure. And so the alien ideology later in the story will attempt to, impose perfect unity and order, which ironically mirrors Jake's worldview in an extreme form. And so that creates the philosophical conflict in the film. It's very clever, very clever. Symbolic role of Jake, if we're going to put a symbolic role on him. Jake is the individual. He's the individual mind resisting collective ideology, right? As an observer and everything. And so that's Jake. That's Jake. And we see more of Jake in these scenes. So now our next guy is Aaron. Woo! Shout out to Aaron. Aaron is 30 years old. You know, his occupation, we don't know. We don't know where he works necessarily. But he's a regular customer at McQuade's, McQuade's, and we know that. So his architect is pretty obvious, right? What his, not architect. Archetype. Woo! Architect. Okay. So, all right. Someone guess. What's Aaron's archetype? Go ahead. Yeah. What's Aaron's archetype? Tell me. Anybody know? Come on. This is a really easy one. I don't even need to tell you, folks. This is really easy. I mean, it was so obvious in the scenes. Yep. What's that? Oh, we got one over here. What do you think? Tell me. What do you think? Philosophy. Yes, philosophy. That's right. He is a philosophy man, right? He's the philosophical disruptor, more specifically. He's the philosophical disruptor. Mm-hmm. Good job. Hey, good job. Come to me at the end of class. We'll give you a big golden star. And maybe some chewing gum, too, if you want it. No, just kidding. But yeah, he's the philosophical disruptor, you know. And his surface personality is, you know, he's charismatic, he's calm, he's intellectually curious. Unlike Jake, you know, Aaron loves challenging people with questions. And he doesn't argue aggressively, you know. He probes gently. He probes gently when he's trying to get information. But yeah, he's definitely challenging people. And so, you know, in the script, right, he talks about the alcohol thing, right? If alcohol lowers inhibition, does that mean drunk people are closer to the truth? Or another thing he says is like, if winning requires losing control, did you really win? When Jake's asking if he wants to outdrink him. And Aaron enjoys destablishing people's assumptions. Aaron loves destablishing people's assumptions, you know, and so some of his psychological traits are that of which curiosity about belief systems, right? He's got some major curiosity and big questions in his mind. Aaron constantly tests people's philosophies. It's just what he does, you know, and that's what makes him a pretty interesting character. Another thing he has that not everybody in the movie has, is social intelligence. So despite his philosophical nature, Aaron integrates easily into the group dynamic. And, you know, Phil teases him, but also buys him a drink. You know, Phil gives him a bunch of shit as soon as he walks in, but he buys him a drink because he respects him, he likes him. And that shows alone from that interaction that Aaron is not seen as a stranger or threatening initially. And so, you know, towards the end of the scene, then we see this dual identity, right? We see this dual identity in Aaron towards the end of the scene. And the car scene reveals that Aaron can switch instantly between friendly philosopher to eerily controlled, you know, agent, right? As if he's a KGB or something. It's pretty crazy. And the sudden sobriety shift suggests this external influence or conditioning. Let me say that again. The sudden sobriety, right, or even better, the sudden change, the sudden shift in his behavior, in the way he interacts with Jake, you know, when they're drunk in the car, it is suggesting, it's showing this external influence or conditioning. So what is the narrative function of this? Aaron is the messenger of the alien ideology, right off the bat. He's the first one, even before the audience knows it. And so his key line foreshadows the entire story. Because remember, he turns to Jake like a nut job and he says, If somebody came offering unity, would you resist it? And that question becomes the central moral dilemma of the film. It becomes the central moral dilemma of the film. Because it's the alien ideology. And so, Aaron represents this seductive logic of collective harmony, right? He's the seduction when it comes to that ideology being pushed on everyone later. Because you'll see Aaron is acting very similar to the guys that we'll see in the propaganda commercial, as I mentioned a couple classes back when we talked about that creepy video. That would be a lovely scene to break down and go over. But now our next character is Kate. We're going to go over Kate again. Remember, I think last time we talked about Kate, we were telling you about how she's, she likes to drink and listen to country music and drink her sorrows away. What will you? Which I mentioned, that's, a stereotype in itself. That is relatable to a small town or a big town. There's always those people that do that. She's just a really young version of that. She's the produce clerk, as we've talked about before, at McQuade's. And the archetype. Okay, archetype. So what is Kate's archetype? I'll give you this one. This one's a little harder to get to. But she's the spontaneous human spirit, right? And it's funny, it's very obvious, but she's very much that spontaneous human spirit. She's witty, sarcastic, socially confident. She uses humor as her primary way of interacting with people. Her tone towards Jake is teasing, but affectionate. And, this is shown earlier in the scene where she says, besides, some people might think it's worth the risk. See, and so what she's doing right there when she said that, she's flirting. She's very much flirting. Flirting with Jake, without making it obvious. And so what we notice in Kate is her emotional openness. Kate believes in experiences rather than certainty. And her worldview is contrasts to Jake's logic, right? In major ways. Jake says that one-liner, right? I just like things that make sense. And Kate responds, well, that's the boring way to live, right? So Kate has social awareness. She notices emotional dynamics very quickly, is what we're seeing here. And she watches Jake closely during conversations, not only because she's interested, but because she's just aware and prone to look for those things. She has a playful confidence. Her kiss on Jake's cheek shows how comfortable she is expressing interest without making it serious. And so what is the narrative function of Kate? Well, there's a couple things. There's the love interest, obviously. That's the most obvious one. Kate and Jake are most likely going to fall in love. I think they will fall in love, and we'll see what happens. I'll talk to my script writers about that one. But another thing that she really symbolizes is she is very much the representing the human unpredictability, right? She is representing the human unpredictability. Woo. And in the story, about this enforced unity, right? That Aaron is our first introduction to that, but the whole movie is about this enforced unity from a evil entity. But Kate embodies, right off the bat, this freedom of feeling and spontaneity. And, she represents human individuality, emotional risk. So that's Kate. All these characters are very well thought out, I'll tell you what. So then that takes us to Phil, right? So Phil, you might think, oh, he's not that important, but he is. Phil is very important because he's, establishing the relationships that Jake has. And so those are really important to be brought out, and they can only be brought out by Jake. Jake is the social anchor. He's the social anchor. He's loud, sarcastic, comedic. He's always acting as if the social glue of the group, keeping everyone together. He imitates jokes, diffuses tensions, and he has protective humor. That's one of his traits, is protective humor, which is pretty common for an older gentleman who's been around a little bit, married and everything. I think this is just very much playing along the lines of different types of behavior in men too, just in general. But he uses protective humor. He's constantly joking, and his actions, in contrast, reveal a more caring personality. Like, for example, he buys Aaron a drink, even when he's teasing him. It shows good natured camaraderie, is what how I would put it. Anyway, and so stability is another thing that Phil is very much representation of, is stability. Unlike Jake and Aaron, Phil is not philosophical, no pun intended. He exists firmly every day in the world, right, in this reality. His priorities: work, friend, wife, fun. Right? Work, friends, wife, fun. That's it. It's all Phil is. Phil's a fairly simple guy, when it comes to what's important to him. And so that, comes with emotional grounding, right? Phil prevents conversations from being too serious. Probably at home with his wife too. He always uses his security that he has, and his emotional groundedness and his protective humor and all that. He represents that ordinary humanity. Very, very relatable to the audience, right? That ordinary humanity. Everyone else kind of sticks out in a weird way. A lot of it's because, Jake's the main character. Aaron is obviously kind of this antagonist / protagonist later. But he anchors the story in the realism before the science fictions start to come into play, right? Before the science fiction elements arrive. So his role symbolically is a normal life, just your average Joe, normal life before the world changes. He's representing that normal life before everything changes. Which then we go into Clayton. So Clayton is the big brother. He's the burdened brother. He's in his early 30s, by the way. So they're all older than Jake, except Kate. But, and so his personality is very much, seems to be on the surface at least, calm, controlled. However, the tension between him and Jake is pretty immediate. It's pretty obvious. And their conversation feels polite, but it's very guarded. Very, very guarded. You can tell from the dialogue, right? And their conversation is, very detached from each other. And a lot of that is on Clayton's side. It's this quiet resentment that he holds. He holds a subtle, quiet resentment. And that subtleness is shown, right, in that one line that he says, where he says, yeah, I guess some people get that. Implying that Jake had freedoms that Clayton didn't when they were both growing up. Ooh. So instead, he expresses his feelings through subtle remarks, and that's just how he makes it. Another thing, though, that is cool about Clayton, because it is cool because he's a very complex character. And I love complex characters, and so does the audience when you get them into it. You gotta introduce them properly. But he represents responsibility. He is responsibility. His demeanor shows and suggests that he's someone who carries obligation, and that he gets things done, and that he's regimented, if you will. And so Clayton introduces Jake's unresolved past, right? Exposing Jake for why Jake maybe is the way he is in a lot of ways. He holds the other side of the truth. Very important, very important. So his later reappearance during the Alien War, which when we get to that, you'll love how it comes back, but he represents family reconciliation through crisis. Clayton is that of which family reconciliation through crisis. And so he really does symbolize the weight of life choices and responsibility. He represents the weight of all of that. So, wow. Who's our next character? Our next character is Savannah, right? So right next to him, his wife, Savannah, who is kind of a neutral observer. You would think, why are we doing a character study of his wife? You know, she's kind of a background character. Oh no, folks. See, this is how you really make a script stick out, is you gotta take into consideration every character is very, very important. Every character. No matter how small of a role they have. Let me double check our Zoom here. Okay, we got about a couple more minutes here. I'll try to wrap this up quick. But Savannah is that neutral observer. Her role is small but important. She observes the tension between the brothers without interfering, silently. And her politeness stabilizes the conversations. So, obviously she's functioning as a social buffer in that conversation, and her presence prevents the meeting between Jake and Clayton of becoming hostile. And she allows the scene to remain awkward rather than explosive, right? She just kind of is keeping the peace, but leaving it as it is, right? She's not going to try to do anything too crazy or radical and be like, hey, get out of here, or nothing. No, she's on everybody's side. She's on everybody's side. And so, what's a group dynamic here that I could tell you about? This is this whole bar scene forms this microism of human society. Each character represents a different way of engaging with reality. We have Jake, who's the logic. Aaron is ideology. Kate is emotion. Phil is an everyday humanity. And Clayton is personal history. These worldviews collide throughout the film once the alien ideology of unity enters the story. So why do these scenes work? Well, these scenes succeed because they build characters before the sci-fi plot begins. By the time the crash happens, the audience understands that about Jake's skepticism, Aaron's philosophy, Kate's warmth, Phil's humor, and Clayton's unresolved tension. And that makes the later invasion feel like a disruption of real lives, not just a spectacle. See, so it's setting up the film to feel real, To make a good science fiction movie, you want it to feel real. You want it to feel real. It's not so much of fixating on the special effects and making sure those look good, or making sure the creature looks super uncanny and all that. No. It's put your audience in the real world with real people and have their lives be disturbed by the world around them. That's how you set up a very good sci-fi picture. Picture. All right, folks. Well, there you go. That's all I have for you today. Whew, a lot of material to go through, but I'm glad that we could get it done. And again, I will, I don't know if I told you that already, but I'll put this on Canvas, okay? This will be on Canvas, and some of the notes that I fixated on for you will also be Canvas. And so, yeah, thank you so much, though, for everyone showing up to class. And I'm sure our next class, I'm hoping, will be even better, and that we'll have a microphone that works a little better. Okay, thanks, guys. See you next time. Bye-bye. Yeah, what's that? Oh, yeah. No, and so what you want to do is